All right, welcome back to the next episode of Out of the Woods, where we're attempting to help as many founders and operators and executives get it through these challenging economic times as possible, bringing on different founders and operators to share their story of what they're doing to navigate some of these tumultuous times, but also sharing some stories of kind of past events and anecdotes that will also help founders kind of work through this. So super excited for the next guest. We have Sam Shepler, founder, CEO of Testimonial Hero, big advocate for the productized service movement. So I want to go into that a little bit, but excited to have you on here. And it looks like you're a fellow reader as well. So we always enjoy talking to people who are curious.
Absolutely. And, hopefully for folks watching this on video, they can see the bookshelf in the background, but if it's just on audio, you can just imagine it. But yeah,
they're all fake books.
Exactly.
They're
just
placeholders.
Exactly. But yeah, thanks, Michael. It's great to be here. Really excited to chat today.
Sweet. Awesome. So, first off, just want to go through backstory. Like I said, most of this is around tactical kind of advice for teams on a day-to-day basis, but still interested in kind of the backstory and what got you here. So, I was reading, you've always kind of been in this video kind of production world a little bit back in college. So where'd that get started and how did it ultimately lead to Testimonial Hero?
Yeah. So it first got started even just like earlier than college. I kind of learned how to do video production, because I wanted to make snowboarding videos up in Vermont.
We're using like iMovie?
Yeah, using iMovie. That was exactly what I used. And like, this was before like the there was like these like little cassette tape type cameras. But so that's kind of how I got started way back. But like, college, we just wanted to make some extra money. And during college, and I realized I could kind of like convince some local, businesses to, help solve some problems with them, for them with video, and did that a little bit. And, by the time that I graduated college, basically had built up a little, book of business doing that, and, partnered with a couple of my friends, college friends, and we kind of just built a video production agency, built that up for, I guess, like 4 or 5 years, ended up getting, basically acqui-hired by a, large, national PR company who wanted to do like a bolt-on, video production arm. Left that because honestly, like I didn't love working in a larger company. Was
that your first time working for a company before in general, like a first normal job?
Basically, yes. So I had done like, other than just random jobs before that, I'd been a personal trainer, and that you're kind of like an independent contractor. You you just have your own book of business and you work in the gym. So like, and then the other job, I worked for an entrepreneur. I was kind of just like a gopher, like doing anything, for this, entrepreneur who ran at one time, it was probably the world's biggest Halloween e-commerce site. So that was actually, that was even, during, midway through college. And that's how I got like the entrepreneurship bug, was like working for another entrepreneur, which I think is interesting. Like before that, I wanted to take my video skills and basically go to LA and like be like a film director. And then I worked for this entrepreneur and I was like, wait, no, I want to be an entrepreneur. This is awesome.
So there wasn't anything growing up though that got you into entrepreneurship? It was something that you acquired kind of later on.
In hindsight, I think I definitely had like the lemonade stand and a few other kind of like, things, sold some painted rocks, at one point, I'm sure, when I was like 12, I remember that. But so, yeah, I think it was kind of always there. But it wasn't like plan A, like when I like arrived at college. And this was like, when I arrived at college, this was like 2007. So like, it wasn't quite at the point where like startups and entrepreneurs, it was like right about there where like
wasn't like a sexy career path.
Exactly. So like, but yeah, I think it was always something that I, really, I like the kind of intellectual challenge of it, and, the kind of just it's challenging and exciting, and always thrilling one way or another, good and bad.
Did you go to a school that was entrepreneurial?
So not particularly. I went to, Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and it does have like an entrepreneurship minor, but I think that was like the extent of it. And I didn't, do that. I did, film. I took one entrepreneurship class essentially, and it was good, but yeah, that was it.
Gotcha. And then how'd you get into something so specific as testimonial, as a productized service? I mean, it's a very niche specific, product or service. What was kind of the backstory there?
So it was a combination of, basically some just like strategic, plan, things. I saw the opportunity and I knew it was a good opportunity, and, also just personal interest. So it was really, the combination of, there's a pragmatic element and also a personal element. Basically I had, in my previous, video agency, basically we're a full service agency. That doesn't really, that can be good if you go ultra premium, but it also doesn't really, otherwise it just doesn't scale, very well. And I wanted to do something, more scalable. So I basically, thought about, okay, what can deliver the most value to the customer, and also is a type of video project that I can put a process behind, right? That I don't have to be reinventing the wheel every time. And there's a number of potential projects, but I personally liked customer testimonials because they're just so powerful, and to just tell the story from the point of the customer, and close deals faster, and also like you can totally put a process behind them. So that was essentially and also I thought that the way they were being done was kind of broken. And I wanted to I set out to fix that.
I imagine you had like a little bit of kind of PTSD from the agency world where it's kind of open ended, and projects can be, customers can be demanding. It's hard to price things out. Was that kind of part of it too, of like why you wanted to go into something more specific and packaged up, is just to avoid that kind of the draining, nature of that world, and kind of the unpredictability of it?
That was definitely a big part of it. I think, I had, I just kind of had that experience, and I wanted to try. I wanted to try something new that I thought would be better. And yeah, I definitely I think for a lot of services, I mean, agencies can still be really good businesses. Especially if you're ultra premium. But if you're like not premium and you do a ton of different things, it can just be like a really it can be hard to extract yourself out of the process. And basically, we were able to grow so much faster, doing what we're doing. And also for me, pretty much, have removed myself from the day to day, have a general manager, in place. And it would have been so much harder to do that if we were trying to do all sorts of things to all people. So that I think is one of the benefits of, the productized service model is, in theory, you're really able to, sell it easier, remove yourself from delivering it, and just kind of remove yourself, more. And then that's also, the key to scaling faster, right? Because if everything has to go through you, as you really know well, like it's just like you're such a limiting factor.
Yeah. So what was kind of like the evolution? Did you go into this business saying, "Hey, I want this to be a really productized, scalable thing," or was it something that like you kind of had in your mind, but it started as an agency that was just kind of specialized, and over time it evolved? And then as you evolved it, like what are the specific things that you were able to do and continue to do to make it more scalable and make it less dependent on you?
So initially, I honestly initially I just wanted to create some more cash flow. That was like my first thing. Like basically after I had left the company that acquired us, spent like a year really trying a lot of different stuff. Tried like a couple of software ideas that like didn't pan out, and it just had gotten to a point where I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna have to like I need some to make some cash flow, or else I'm going to have to like start dipping into things that I'd rather not dip into.
Yep.
So just being completely honest, my vision initially wasn't like super big. Like day one, it was just like, okay, like I need to do something I know will work. Like I know this will work. And then after that, I was like, this is cool. Like I just want to keep it small, and I still want to do something more like that could be like a moonshot type thing. And then after that, I was like, well, actually, I think this could be bigger than I think. And then, let's see how, big we can take it, and, or how quick we can grow it. And right now, I think for 2022, Inc. 5000 just came out. And happy to say we were number 342 on the 2022 Inc. 5000. So yeah, growing super quickly. You know, I mean, you know, certainly not the fastest, but in the top, you know, 10% of the Inc. 5000 puts us in the top 1% of fastest growing private companies, I'd say. So yeah, I think that's kind of, and now we're just really, really excited to like go big with it. But it's funny, like I almost gave up so many times because I'm like, oh, this will never scale. And like so many people told me like, oh, like, oh, this will never scale. It's like, why are you doing like an agency? Like blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, like, first of all, it's not exactly an agency. Second of all, like,
Yep.
we'll see, you know, right? So like, I think one of the biggest things that I would tell myself if I could have back then is just to have a bit more like, you know, confidence and, you know, basically that, you know, anything can scale if you keep working the problem, right? It's a lot of, you know, people will say things from their perspective, but also you have to think it's like, it's also relative, right? Like, you know, we're also bootstrapped as a company. So like, we don't need to build, you know, $100 million company in 5 years to be meaningful, right? So I think that's another thing is like, you know, scale is relative, and you know, you can have a really good outcome, especially if you're bootstrapped at a, you know, relatively smaller size. Then like that's something that's not venture scale.
Yep. I think there's like this misconception too that startup founders are just these super big, ambitious risk takers that just think that they can never fail and they're just gonna, you know, build these huge companies super quickly. Like, you know, for me, and it sounds like the same for you, you didn't think or realize that the company could be as big as it ultimately turned out to be. Like every, you know, for us, as we kept kind of scaling and reaching new milestones, I was always the one, and I'm always super confident in what we're doing, but I was always the one that was shocked by like how fast we were moving or how fast we were growing out of a warehouse or whatever it might be. And you constantly kind of, you know, if you just focus on, you know, keeping your head down and working and solving customer problems, you pick your head up like a year later and you're like, holy shit, like where did the time go? How did we get this big? Where did all these people and employees come from? And, you know, a lot of times like outsiders, like we got messages. I remember there's this old Facebook message that I got when we started the company saying how bad of an idea SwagUp was and how manual it is and how not scalable it is and how it'll never turn into anything. And it's just interesting that I think a lot of people kind of shy away from these, you know, taking something that is traditionally analog and using technology to enable it to be much bigger. Like, you know, they don't necessarily see it because they're so used to seeing these businesses be a certain way. But there's a lot of opportunities in kind of these old fashioned kind of standard kind of businesses that can be reinvented, I think.
100%. And yeah, that's another term, you know, you mentioned like tech enablement, like that's another term. That's actually how we typically describe ourselves internally as a tech enabled service, because we're building software internally to kind of be the kind of Iron Man suit for our internal people that allows them to, you know, be incredibly, you know, more efficient, and, you know, also deliver like a better customer experience as well. And like, it's not customer facing software yet, but like that will be the next evolution, and, you know, and such. And then, yeah, the other thing I think is like, you know, there's a lot of white space if you don't, you know, mind getting your hands dirty in these, you know, sort of tech enabled service area. There's a ton of white space there because it's harder in a lot of ways. And well, you know, it's harder to, you know, go from like 0 to 100 million like overnight. And so that, you know, there's just less, you know, companies that are getting funded relatively in that space. But when you add, human talent into the picture, you also can create a competitive advantage in terms of the level of service and the level of quality. And that can be it's like, you know, going after, you know, when you compete with like another venture backed competitor, you have access to the entire playbook of strategy, and there's just certain things that they can't do because like they have to hit a certain growth rate for their investors, right? So I think that is super exciting as a bootstrapped founder to think about, okay, like what options are, you know, what quote unquote unscalable options are available to me, and how can I actually, you know, use that to my advantage and differentiate because of that? Because I know my competitors, you know, can't do this forever because, you know, it's just not you know, it's just long term, like their business model is dependent on them reaching a certain place and with a certain period of time, and, you know, really eliminating the human element. So yeah.
I think the interesting thing though is that a lot of these venture backed companies are really productized services or even tech enabled services that are masking as pure technology companies, and they're using, hype and marketing and funding to kind of, obfuscate that and hide the fact. Because there was this big company down in Austin that was like an automated AI accounting company, and they raised a ton of money. And then it ultimately came out that they really just had like human accountants on the
In the
back end, kind of
Philippines.
working with,
Yeah.
yeah, like working
Yeah.
with their tech platform, but also kind of guiding the process along. And they were kind of touting it as this like AI kind of super smart, like the future of accounting at companies. And I think when you peel the curtain back at a lot of these companies, a lot of times it is people behind the scenes kind of helping guide these processes, and they're not fully automated. Like I tweeted the other day that I really think that it takes about 5 years. If you go down like a product led kind of path or a technology centric path, I think it takes about 5+ years to really start to like mature as a technology product to solve a problem in the right way. So I think what you're doing and what like a SaaS company you're doing are a lot of times very similar. It's just like the time frames can sometimes get a little bit more kind of compressed when you have all that capital to invest faster.
Yeah, 100%.
And then how do you think, at this point, you've built it into a nice sized business. Like, do you have ambition to turn it into some sort of scalable product, or is it like, hey, like what we have is a great business. We're going to continue to grow it. We're going to build technology internally to make these things more efficient, or do you want to go after, some sort of bigger scalable opportunity that's like backable in some way?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I just came back from vacation, so I was thinking about this a little bit, and when I had some downtime, and I think we're not, we want to stay bootstrapped, in general. I think unless we're 100%, and like never say never, but like it would have to be like the perfect partner and like the perfect terms, and and such. Like I think just like being bootstrapped gives us a lot of optionality. And also I think it right now, at least, like it forces us to kind of, run the business a little bit better, and, gives us some constraints, I think, like, and so, yeah, so to answer the first question, I fully continue to bootstrap, intend to continue to bootstrap. I mean, we're approached by investors, almost daily these days, like, which is interesting because like,
Even in
even
this
in this
environment?
environment. Yep. Yeah. So I think, I mean, there's so much capital on the sidelines that was
Yep.
raised. Like, yes, even in this, environment. The thing is, like,
I think profitable businesses are hard to come by
yeah,
too.
definitely.
Growing profitable businesses.
Yes, and I will say, like, I think we get more interest from like smaller private equity shops, and like we're so, which is also, I think, with private equity, they aren't, from what I understand, is like they're not quite as particular about the category, like if your business is a SaaS or if it's not, like as long as your metrics fit their kind of financial model, like they don't really care what type of you call it your business, because like they're just going to grow
Yep.
it and sell it to
They're going to
another.
look at the future
Yeah,
cash flows, and
exactly.
that's it.
So like, which is, I think, interesting, and I've had taken some
I
calls.
mean, who's to say that SaaS or MRR or whatever is actually a better business model? I mean, fundamentally, recurring revenue and locked in contracts and this or that, there's a compounding nature to it, especially if you have like really strong net dollar retention. But I mean, it's just a business model. It's not like necessarily the holy grail potentially.
Yeah, I think yeah, as long as you have really strong gross margins, and your CAC to LTV ratio is really good, and you're growing, really fast. I think that's if you have those three things, like that's, I think, like the what a lot of these private equity shops are most focused on. I mean, because that's if you have all those things, you have a really good business, regardless of the details, right?
Yep. I saw you talk a lot about like the team and being able to bring in great talent to kind of, allow you to take a step back from the business. So you use values to hire and use the vision to get people excited. But, do you ever find it challenging as a bootstrap company that's kind of okay to continue down this bootstrap journey to get, really ambitious people through the door? Because, I think some founders out there feel, oh, I need the venture capital, I need the big vision, or else I'm not going to be able to hire the best people in the world to go after it. Like, do you ever think about that? And has that ever been a challenge for you all?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so. In my experience, think we were really helped by, fortunately, combination of, luck for sure played some role in it, but also just like our early hires, have been able to grow, and grow with the company. And they are our first two employees, are like on the executive team, basically with me, and then we just hired recently another executive team member. But like that, I think is pretty rare to have those like first two employees just be people who can actually grow and scale with the company. That being said, like that was like also like my intention, and I wanted to make sure that they were. From the start I thought they were. So like I also wanted to, wasn't just like complete luck, but yeah, I think those early hires, the early DNA makes a big difference. It's really hard to change, like a lot of. It's not impossible, but it's obviously just harder. If you have to change that early DNA. Also, I would say,
I think early people just like, and they become the roots of the culture because they hire people underneath them. They just influence all processes. It becomes contagious.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think it's like you can, a couple of things that I've thought about, like we've hired some really great talent in Canada. The Canadian dollars, the exchange rate is favorable. So like when we pay people a US,
getting better
yeah,
too, right?
exactly. So like we can, pay relatively a little less and get, better talent in Canada than we could if we hired, in the US for some roles. Right. So I think, thinking about that, like Geoarbitrage, is pragmatic for bootstrappers. Same with Latin America. We've hired some incredible talent in Latin America. It's not like we're settling at all on the talent. Like this is like still as good as any talent anywhere. And so I think that's and just obviously like significantly cheaper, significantly more cost effective. So I think like that's part of it. Just the reality is, yes, it's so much harder when you don't have just like so much venture capital to deploy, but there's certainly ways that you can do it. Another thing is like the comp plans, like tying them to success of the business. Like we've in executive comp plans, marketing comp plans, sales comp plans, like I think you can give people like a lot of upside, and also reduce the risk, for you as the founder, if you have like the right, incentive structure in place. Another thing is like you can also really, tie people in to like the growth of the company if they believe in the company long term. So I think like, for example, we just hired a fantastic new, VP of revenue who's going to be leading our, sales and, marketing team. And like, he probably took a little bit of a salary cut from his venture funded startup or whatever to leave us. But he, if, in, a year or two, like if he, if and when we grow the company, as we know we can, and he believes in it, like he's going to actually be, making even more than he would, because, it takes like, he just has to, basically, take ownership of that and drive that. So I think the comp plans is like, if you get people who really believe in the company and you give them the right comp plan, you can actually achieve a lot of those same things and get them the great financial outcome, as well as obviously, the lifestyle benefits that come with,
Some people don't want to deal with like the politics of these hyper growth organizations that are hiring so many people, and they may get hired above them, or they have to inherit these big teams that they don't want to deal with, or there's just a lot of pressure from outside investors. Like, especially if this is you're a little bit more seasoned, a lot of seasoned people kind of get disillusioned by the whole VC world, and they find it to be a game that, benefits a few people, and it's just not really the right way to build a sustainable business and career. And they're like, they really are refreshed by kind of the bootstrap nature and more sustainable nature of some of these businesses. So I think, to your point, if you can use it to a strength, I think you can attract really great people sometimes.
100%. And I think you said it well. It's like great people get like disillusioned with like the, the VC pressure cooker, and like this whole thing of like, okay, like we, went to the board and like we set these targets. They're ridiculous, but we had to tell the board that to, because that's what the board wants to hear. And now like, how do we hit this? Like, let's just try and figure it out. Like, yeah, that can really wear on you after a while. And like, Obviously we have very aggressive like growth targets, but it is definitely different. And for a lot of people, I think that, yeah, it's just like, as you said, like how can you use the flip it around and turn it to your advantage, right?
Yep. And I think sometimes too, when you lead with things like we've raised this amount of money, or we're this Inc.'s best place to work, or like if you get too big into like the hype of those types of things to attract talent, you can easily start to attract talent for the wrong reasons. They go to your company because they have this idea of what it's like to be at like a fun, interesting company. But when it comes down to like doing the work or just being there with a small team and being a good team player, like it starts to fall apart. They get less interested in it. So I think it's really important too to find those missionary type people that are there for the right reasons. And sometimes when you're a bootstrap company, it kind of filters out or weeds out some of the people that are there for the wrong reasons as well.
100%. Yeah.
On the LATAM and Canada side, I mean, I think this is a huge area that's going to continue to grow a ton going forward. I mean, I think remote work really started to expose the idea that people can work from anywhere. And by the way, if people can work from anywhere, why do they have to be from this country? Why can't they be from any country? I mean, as long as we can communicate and we have technology, it starts to lower the barrier and says, well, why isn't somebody in Guatemala just as qualified for this role that versus somebody from Texas? I think that the barriers to work are being brought down, and companies like Deal and Remote and all these companies are going to do really well because they're helping companies onboard and do this the right way. But do you see that being like a key kind of strategy going forward to just hire wherever the best talent is, and and if it's more affordable somewhere else, like it's totally fine. It's just as good to hire people over there.
Yeah, I do. And it's one thing I'll just share, like a couple of things that I've learned is like we basically have hired a lot in specifically in LATAM, and that has actually helped, I think, from like a cultural perspective, where like a lot of our team is, well, for one, I think there's a lot of shared culture between North America and LATAM. Like just being in the Americas, like it's a lot of cultural similarities compared to like, okay, like hiring, Philippines is great in a lot of respects too. Like we don't have any Filipinos on our team, but I know a lot of people who've built their business with great and obviously very cost effective Filipino teams. But it's like a very there's some more cultural differences, right? So like I think there's something to be said for finding an area and kind of committing to it and like sticking to it. And that's kind of what we did with LATAM. Like we've just decided like, okay, we're going to hire, we're always like look to LATAM first, because that's where we have critical mass. Like it's really easy to integrate new people. Like we have people that become friends and then like traveled from like Colombia to Uruguay, or you're like everyone on our team is always like they didn't know each other before, but now they like meet up in person, and like that is cool. So like you don't get that if you have like one person in in Ukraine, one person in India, one person in the Philippines. Not that it can't work, but like just kind of unintentionally we built up like this critical mass, and actually think it's been a huge like cultural plus for us and as far as like remote culture.
Would you ever open like a centralized office somewhere down there, or would it just be very still distributed?
Yeah, we've thought about it. We have thought about it, and we definitely might, for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Well, to transition a little bit, wanted to get into some of the, the more current day stuff. Like, for those not paying attention, what's your take on what's going on in the startup world right now? What's going on in the venture world? What's going on in kind of just the broader economy? Kind of what are you seeing, and how much do you pay attention to these things versus just paying attention to, your business specifically?
So I definitely, well, I think it's a balance. Like I try to, definitely pay attention to it, but also from my perspective, like the biggest thing is I look at it as like a challenge to like, how can I, make myself better? How can I make the company better? And like the whole idea, like constraints, breed creativity, or like, the whole like obstacle is the way idea. Last year, like, we were on a tear, and like a lot of our marketing was working really well. And this year, like it's, some of the stuff that was really easy last year wasn't, isn't working as well. And then we go look at it, we're like, this is actually just kind of like, not that great. Like, if we're being honest, like this is good. Like, now we have an opportunity to like push ourselves, like actually do better. And like, we probably would have just let it slide if like things were just, if we were in this super frothy, environment, more like last year, right? So I think like, for me personally, like I try, like obviously like there are moments when I'm like frustrated, right? But like I try to come at it from the perspective of like, this is every challenge is an opportunity, and like, if this channel's not working anymore, like good, let's use that as an opportunity to be better and like build a better business long term. So yeah, that's how I try to look at it, I'd say.
I think good times can hide and mask a lot of issues in businesses. Like you said, if there's just a lot of frothiness, there's a lot of money going around, there's a lot of demand, you can kind of continue to build a good enough business and hide and sweep under the rug the issues. And these types of times for the good teams, I think they use it as an opportunity to kind of buckle down and make things fundamentally stronger and better. And then when you get back to those kind of frothier times, you're just like a 5 times, 10 times stronger business than you might have been, otherwise if you didn't go through it. So I think sometimes there's a lot of kind of opportunities that present themselves through this, even though they might be hard lessons to learn sometimes.
Exactly. And I'll give one example from, the 2020, obviously, 2020, COVID-19, the first iteration, like we had to completely change our business model because of it basically at one time we were essentially kind of like Uber for filming in-person video testimonials. So we would always be sending a videographer to the customer's office, and we did this all over the world. But obviously in COVID, like that wasn't possible. So we didn't have a remote testimonial service line until COVID, and now that is by far our fastest growing and most profitable line. And we probably we had thought of it prior to COVID, but we just basically dismissed it. And we're like, oh, like, and like, no, like that, it's not,
what does that actually mean? That means that you guys send like a kit to these people with instructions and kind of let them self-guide the process.
So, basically, yeah, that's basically it, except for we don't send a kit, because, we want it to be as frictionless as possible. So we have, the client, the testifying customer basically just downloads an app, and then we have a real, interviewer or creative producer on our team who interviews them live, gets them to tell that great story, runs that 30-minute interview, and then the footage is sent automatically to us, and our editing team creates all of the different clips and micro content and kind of repurposes that whole remote interview.
Gotcha. And did revenue, was there a time period for those first couple months where like revenue basically went to zero while you're trying to figure some of this stuff out? Like, did it get pretty lean and challenging and scary, or you kind of were able to, float for a little bit while you figured it out?
Yeah, it did. It did, for a couple months back then, and I think we were also smaller. We were smaller back then. So it's like our costs were less, and we were able to kind of handle that a bit more. But yeah, I think it's we also kind of just got creative and just kind of got scrappy, and we're like, okay, like we wouldn't typically do this project, but a client asked us to do this, so we'll do it right now. But
It became a little bit less productized.
Yeah, exactly. It's like sometimes you gotta just do what you gotta do. But I think as it pertains to but yeah, I guess like tying it back to this year and 20 mid and 2022, like late August 2022, like yeah, I think it's the same. I try to look at it personally from the same idea as okay, like what creative constraints breed creativity. Like what can we take away from this, and like how can we use these constraints or these challenges to ultimately be a step up for the future of the company.
I think one thing too that kind of comes out of this is you see really the value of constraints, because it's even more so like bootstrapping alone has plenty of constraints, but when you're in economically distressed times, your customers are no longer buying, or the service or product that you have is no longer relevant or something, like that's even stronger of a constraint. And you realize like how creative the team gets, or how proactive, or how much harder you work and stuff. And I think about this sometimes. Do you think about kind of extending these constraints just into the day-to-day kind of culture of the business going forward? Like how do you take kind of the superpowers that are, in the adrenaline almost that the team is kind of on through these times, and take them into the day-to-day of the company to just constantly be on the cutting edge and constantly be doing, more and doing better? Like, is that something you think about at all?
That's a good question. Probably should think about it more. Maybe we don't, do it enough. Honestly, like I think it's just, I think human nature, like when times are good, it's very easy to, sometimes lose track of things, and, just kind of get a little bit, slack, but especially if you don't have the right metrics, right? Cause like I think that is probably, one of the biggest things is like, if you're just using sort of like, if you don't have the right, metrics in place and you don't have the right like dashboard, for your business, like you can, sort of gut, instinct, which is super important, can also, lie to you, right? Ultimately, like you need to, like the numbers are going to tell the truth. So I think, that, I think, is super key, right? And that's something that we didn't really have, in place, like as, we like, so 2021, super, frothy year from, economic perspective. Like, again, like that covers up a lot of stuff, right? And, we didn't realize like in 2021, like we were just able to get by on, a lot. And like, we didn't have some of the right, metrics in place. And then, when 2022, didn't exactly, continue on that same like rocket ship trajectory for, the global markets and the macro situation, we were like, oh shit, like that kind of like, caught us a little off guard. And, the thing is though, like if we had the right metrics in place, we wouldn't have, been, so surprised. So I think that's kind of like, that was just the lesson that we had to learn. Yeah. And yeah.
I think too, like for some of its shortfalls, one of the values of kind of these venture backed companies or venture backed kind of like structures is that they typically come with boards that hold teams accountable or help or make or push them to be more aggressive, set goals that are, stretches, and then follow up with the team and give them that accountability to make it happen. And I think one of the things that, we maybe made mistakes on and other bootstrap companies might make mistakes on is maybe you don't need like the VC backed kind of board, but you should have some sort of forcing mechanism or external pressure to kind of make sure you're always on top of your game, make sure you're always double, rethinking kind of your decisions or your assumptions. And I think sometimes when you're like a solopreneur or something and you're running a business and you have control and it's going decently well, you don't really have anybody checking you or challenging you. And maybe that's just a mentor, or maybe it's, somebody in the business, or maybe you have an advisory board or something. But I do think that there's value in having that kind of accountability and this group of people that really understand the business and can push you to do more,
Yeah, totally. And, for me,
Do you have something like that?
so, we don't have an advisory board or anything, but I do, and work with a lot of different coaches, or, at different times, right? Like, so for example, during, 2021, I worked, for a couple months with a great, guy who had previously been the GM, CEO of AppSumo. He helped me a ton, Eamon.
Yeah, I saw your tweet that he literally, helped you through a very challenging time. What were some of the like specifics of that?
Yeah, so Ayman Abdullah, super. I don't think he does any more private coaching but if he does, anyone out there should, Bootstrap founder, highly recommend him. His Twitter is great also, but awesome guy. Basically, so yeah, I'll kind of tell you kind of the story of like what I learned from him. I learned a lot, but I think the biggest thing that he told me. So basically, like, to make a long story short, we had like forecast our kind of 2022, goals, kind of too much based on 2021, and obviously 2022 like wasn't 2021. So like, we had to, cut some costs, lay off, a couple people, and basically, I was like, I felt, bad and frustrated with myself as an entrepreneur. I was like, how did I not see this coming? Like, I don't, how am I in this position where,
Don't
yeah,
feel too bad, because I think like 90% of companies are in
yeah,
a,
a
in a
hundred
very
percent.
similar
Yeah.
position, and even the best economists and investors, et cetera, all were kind of sipping the Kool-Aid for as long as they
Yeah,
could.
no, it's true, and that's very true. But and basically, like he kind of, the long story short of it was like we didn't really have the right metrics in place, and he helped us like kind of put the right business dashboard in place with the right like leading indicators, so we could basically just get a accurate picture of where the business was going and everything that we need to know. And the analogy that he told me that kind of really stuck with me is he's like, okay, like, when it's like you're flying a plane, like you're flying like say you're flying like a plane, like in the great economic times, like the sun is shining, like you can just look out the window and you can kind of like see where you are, right? But in a storm, like, you can't do that, and like you need to fly by your dashboard, much more. Like you can't just, look out the window. Also, independent of tough economic times, just at a bigger scale too. So like that was another thing. Like we were, 4 times like the size we had been in, almost, 4 times the size we had been in 2020, and we were still using a lot of the same, reporting, right? So it's like once you get a bigger plane and then you get in foul weather, like you can't just look out the window. You need to fly with a dashboard, and we just didn't have that dashboard. He helped us like get that in place, and basically, that was incredibly helpful. And then since then, like things have been way better, and yeah.
Yeah, no, data visibility is just so important. Like for us in February, it was kind of good timing, because in January, February of 2020, right before the pandemic like really started to hit, I kind of went on this, self exploration of, I want to figure out what inputs drive the business. Like, how can I start to get more predictable around the revenue that we're going to generate? Because, our business for the first few years was very service orientated. It was almost like an agency it was kind of a productized service, and it still is to a degree, but technology is much more at the forefront of what we do today. But in the beginning, it was very, very agency style. And then every month we were going into it with $0 in revenue. Every month you start again, and it's kind of transactional in nature. There's a reoccurring nature, but you don't know for sure what revenue is going to be. And as a bootstrap company, it's really hard to start planning if you don't know what your revenue is going to be, because your revenue is what fuels, the investments that you can make. So, I went down this path to figure out, okay, what are the drivers of the business? And I started to look at, causation and correlation, and doing some data kind of, statistics to look at, okay, things like traffic and leads and accounts and opportunities, and which ones are tied to revenue, which ones are great future indicators. And I was able to build, a model that we still use today that looks at some of those like leading indicators to tell us what revenue is going to look like. And it was really important during the pandemic, because around April, this is month two, month 1.5, month two of the pandemic, revenue, fell a bit, those first couple months, and we weren't sure what the future would hold. But at least I had that kind of input driven model that I can actually see, like, oh shit, actually, it looks like this next month's going to be decent. And the next month after that's going to be even better, because I could see kind of the pipeline starting to build. And I could see some of those leading indicators, pointing to, sunnier skies. So we didn't make really dramatic moves, and we ended up doubling down, and we had, we tripled, we more than tripled that year from a growth perspective, because we stayed aggressive. But, I don't know if I would have had the confidence to make those moves if I didn't see clearly ahead. So I wonder, when you think about dashboarding and stuff, like what are the leading indicators that you're looking at? What's on those dashboards? Like what do you look at on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that's such a good example. And yeah, in terms of what we look at, so it's sort of changed, and we're honing it in. But on the revenue side, we're looking at MQLs. We're looking at are those MQLs converting to actually SQLs, like, and are they converting to opportunities? And like we actually first started like looking at like thinking from a more like MQL target, like, okay, like here's our weekly MQL target, like let's hit that. A couple months later, actually more recently, we've realized, not a shocking thing is like, well, actually MQLs aren't the best indicator of revenue, right? It's SQLs, and like really actually getting people on qualified calls are a way better indicator than just an MQL. And then anytime we have a contract out, if we can get people to the contract stage, we have like a 87%, close rate. So that's like basically, that's a super key one for us. And then we have, a bunch of, those are some of the main ones on the revenue side. And then on the, production side, there's a ton that we look at around throughput, because that's super important too. Like we need it.
These things drive margin, basically.
Yep. Yeah. So they drive margin as it pertains to like actually earning the revenue. Because for us, like, we're typically selling, a big upfront package. So we're collecting that revenue, and then we have to actually earn it as we, deliver, per se in lingo. So that's super important. And we also want to just get our throughput up as much as possible. Because, we can't, that customers want their videos as soon as they can. So that's super important for customer experience. And also like we can't, sell them again and like renew them until, we deliver on that first package. So, definitely, we have it far from figured out, but I think we're just in such a more confident place, than we were, even, 8-9 months ago. Last thing I'll say is like, we actually do this all in a Google Sheet, and it's manually entered. Like, so
I love Google Sheets.
Everyone like it's low tech in a sense on purpose, because then we have to like pay attention to it. Like everyone who owns the metric goes in before like Monday at noon, and they have to have, all the metrics for their department manually entered. And there's, a range of like, okay, like what are we aiming for? And we use a stoplight system. So like, there's like, in color coded green, red or yellow. And if it is, if it's green, like great. If it's yellow, if it's in the yellow range, like, or the red range, like the person who's responsible for that metric has to provide some commentary on it. So we just click comment in the Google Sheet. Like here's what I'm seeing. My hypothesis is this, here's what I plan to do. I don't think this is like a huge deal. And I think we can address this pretty quickly, or like, I'm really concerned about this, blah, blah, blah. So like, basically like, that's kind of, what we do. We use the Google Sheet. We, use
and it's like async, like, is there like a meeting that happens live, or it's all async?
We have a weekly meeting, for it. Yeah. So it's done async, the commenting and the entering, but then, we have a weekly meeting, every Monday, at 3 p.m. where we, go over it, usually for 30 minutes.
And you're saying every leader in the company, owns a specific metric, or is there anything that's kind of owned by multiple parties?
So basically we try to, we try to have, everyone just, nothing owned by multiple parties, if possible. But obviously there are some situations where it's like, some of the leaders are like, I'm accountable for making sure this metric is working, but like ultimately like the individual contributors are, responsible for it. But then it's if it's not working, it's their responsibility to work through the individual contributors to fix it. But yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I want to transition to something else. I saw you talk a little bit about pricing. I think in this environment, obviously people are looking a lot at, gross margin, revenue, cash flow, this and that. How big of a lever do you think pricing is as a strategy to kind of help companies navigate these, tough times?
Yeah, I think, pricing is so important, for so many reasons. And I think a lot of companies, kind of, get it wrong, or, and I think, it's not something we've, nailed yet. It's just so challenging for a lot of reasons. But I think, pulling cash flow wise, like pulling revenue forward, the terms matter. We're always, we're certainly seeing more like pushback on terms. And like, I think the big prevailing,
we are as well.
The big prevailing thing I think that we're all seeing is just like deals are taking longer to close, and they're getting more scrutiny and everything. And, that's kind of, I think, makes sense.
I think during like the hype times of the last few years, it was like, oh, you want to put 30 grand on your credit card? Like, okay, whatever, just do it. And now it's like, oh, you want to spend $5,000? Like, no, procurement needs to see all of that.
Yeah. I would say that's true. One thing that I've learned though, is still sometimes like a lot of companies are happy to, pay up front. Most software companies, try to bill up front. So like, it's not entirely foreign, to them.
Have you ever got caught off guard from an accounting standpoint because of that? I think that sometimes bootstrap companies that collect money up front can sometimes get in the trap of, oh, we just collected all this cash up front, like that's our revenue, and let's start spending it, versus like realizing that it's actually kind of a liability.
Yeah. So we do our books on a cash basis, on accrual basis, and on a kind of hybrid, kind of earned revenue, basis as well, because of being kind of a product as service. So if we didn't do all of those things, then yes, it would be. It absolutely would be. That being said, I think the benefits of the cash, of having that cash flow to like invest and grow, are still so significant, right? It's just like, yes, you absolutely do need to be smart about it, like you said.
Yep. No, for sure. What about, from other kind of cost control methods? You talked about nearshoring to LATAM and Canada. Over the last few years as a bootstrap company, what are some of the other kind of creative ways that you've been looking to extend cash flow, or control costs that are not necessary, or what are some creative things you guys have been doing?
Yeah, so I think one thing we did is, I think we got a large line of credit at the end of last year. In the hype times, we haven't dipped into it yet, but that's definitely related to cost and having some security and wiggle room. I think that was a good thing. Timing was good. Obviously, our with interest rates going up significantly, like if we were to use it, like the interest rate's way higher, but it's still like we still have access to that. So I think that's like one of those things where it's not very helpful necessarily information right now, but it's like you kind of like get that line of credit before you need it, and keep it for a rainy day, and so I think that is good. And I guess I don't know. Nothing really else kind of sticks out for like obvious cost
Most
cutting.
of your
Yeah.
expenses, like besides some of the the team you have in on a corporate level, I mean, are you still paying like contractors to help execute some of these projects, or is it mostly the remote stuff?
So we
Like, what are the core costs that go into your cost of goods sold at this point?
really mostly our in-house team. Like so we
So
yeah,
you're really just looking like, how do you make that team as efficient as possible?
correct, yeah.
Gotcha. And that's through processes, but also some technology. Like you've built some technology to help make that process more, scalable internally.
Yep. So that is something that we're rolling out actually early, next month. So it's like kind of the story is still being written there in terms of like what the productivity and efficiency gains
The
will
impact.
be. But I think that was something that it wasn't really something we did necessarily as like a cost savings thing. It was just something that we were just really excited, to do, to kind of move on to what we saw as like the next evolution of the business, in being more of like a tech enabled service. And also, it's just really sometimes hard to get, project management tools that are out of the box to like work for your business at scale. And you have like 100 zaps, and you're trying to get like Trello and
That's how
Airtable
you
to
had a
communicate.
million Zap tasks last year
Yeah,
or something.
exactly. Yeah. Just like, yeah. So it's like, and so it just, honestly, it was just something that, some of the folks on my team, like were eager to like bite off. And I was kind of like, are you sure we want to build our own project management tool? Like, sounds kind of crazy. But that I'm super excited, and, I think it's going to be a game changer. Honestly. Yeah.
Have you ever checked out things like Retool, where it kind of is a middle solution where you can integrate different data sources, but kind of no code build out the interface, or you went full on kind of custom?
So we're using Bubble. Yeah, so
Yep.
Bubble is a no-code tool. I'm not familiar. I've heard of Retool. I'm not
Swag
super
Up
familiar.
Customer too.
Oh, nice. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're using Bubble, which is obviously super powerful, but is definitely like a low code, or, probably not no code, but definitely low code.
It's crazy what you can do now with like limited experience.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to be an engineer to build really powerful solutions to things. Between things like Airtable and Zapier and some of these other, front ends, you can build pretty great businesses without ever, writing a line of code. It's
Yeah,
pretty
it
awesome.
really is.
Cool. So last few questions I got before we'll wrap it up. One, as you go through kind of challenging times, the plan is changing, or you have to let go of people or whatever it might be. How do you think about just communications with the team and making sure that the people that, you want to, to ensure that they're there with you and they're by your side, feel safe and supported, and, they have, transparency as to what's going on? Like how important do you think like communications is with the team? And then how do you manage them?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not easy. I think, there's a really good book, Hard Thing About Hard Things, I believe.
Ben
Ben Horowitz,
Horowitz.
exactly. Yeah, so I think that
Yeah.
that book, I've read that during COVID, and then I reread parts of it earlier this year. I think that is a great book there. I think one of the things that stuck out with me from that book was like, you can be too positive, with your team when you're, because it's like you can, because like the worst thing you're, or not the worst thing, but like you don't want to like sugarcoat it and be like, things are going to be fine, and then then all of a sudden they're not, right? So like I think it's important to kind of be honest, but and be transparent, and find that line between like coming at it from like the right place of like honesty and like empathy and like really positive communication, but also not and also not kind of fear mongering, or like and also not just blowing smoke up people's ass either, right? So like, because that's not respectful or helpful either, right? So I think it's hard. I think it's just like, to me it's like it I think it's just like you have to take the time to like get in the right mindset prior to you when you do those things, and like but yeah, it's never easy, and it's always, I think a balance, but yeah, clear communication at the end of the day is essential. Like you can't leave people like wondering like, wait, what did he what did they just communicate, like et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's above all, like, yeah, really important in those
Yep.
times.
And I think it's important too that as the leader, you remain kind of even keel and calm. You never want to
100%.
kind of be, flip flopping. Today you say this, tomorrow you say that. You look nervous, you look tired, you look weak. Like you have to be that kind of stabilizing force for the team that keeps them kind of pushing forward and looking forward. And because if it's not you, then who's going to provide that kind of stability for people and give them that confidence? Not, as you said, not necessarily lying and falsely kind of promoting what's going on, but at least being like, hey, this is the reality, but this is why we're fine and we're on the right
Yeah.
track, and being stable for last couple of things. One, opportunities. Whenever there's volatility, new opportunities always kind of present themselves, whether that's internal changes that you're making, but also sometimes externally, like opportunities come available where a competitor maybe is available to be picked up, or whatever, you can go after new markets or whatever. Are you thinking about this from an opportunistic lens, like maybe there's areas for us to kind of pick up new market share or something in an environment like this?
Yes, I definitely. I think so. I think definitely starting to think about that. And just in terms of kind of like learning more about what would it look like to do some like M&A, entrepreneurship, right? Not something that I.
You got to go on micro
Yeah,
acquire.
exactly. Yeah. No, I can't pay those ridiculous multiples. Yeah, no, I love what Mike Require is doing, but like, yeah, it's but yeah, definitely, definitely. I think it's back to what we were talking about earlier, is like the opportunities that these situations also create, and then also I think it's like there's opportunities too for like some venture funded competitors that aren't maybe sustainable, like get kind of shaken out in times like these, where like the sustainable bootstrap companies are able to endure. So I think it's different side of the coin, but that's also something that can happen. Although honestly, I'm rooting for everyone. Like there's so much market share out there for any business. So that's, I would say, not as much of a thing I think about compared to
Driving force.
compared to just like, oh, maybe we can make some acquisitions and get a real fair price during this environment.
Yep. Cool. Last question, which I try to ask everybody on here is, if for the founders or the teams that are listening and are kind of struggling and going through a tough time with their backs against the wall potentially, what would be your number one piece of advice for them and trying to help them get it to the other side and make it out of the woods?
Have a coach that you like to work with. I think the best coaches, business coaches, like they're almost like a therapist, in a sense. Like it's really lonely.
Like Wendy Williams.
Yeah.
Wendy Rhodes.
Yeah,
Wendy
actually,
Rhodes
I've never seen Billions, but I've heard, I'm familiar with it. But yeah, like it's like honestly, like it's lonely, and it can be very lonely as a founder. I actually don't have any co-founders in this company, so like that can be, for other people like that, that's especially kind of, can be lonelier, right? You there's certain things like you always have to, put us on a strong face, or no matter the situation, certain things you can't share. But like with a coach, you can share a lot of that. So I think having a great coach, or, honestly, for some people, like maybe it's like having like a business therapist, like whatever it is, just having someone you can talk to that you can, be open and actually like talk through these things and not have to just like, hold it in. And also most importantly, get like really good perspective on it. Like, I love to work with coaches who've like basically already like achieved like, where I want to go. And then like, I can just like be like, here's what I'm going through. Here's where I'm frustrated. And then usually they can just be like, okay, yeah, I dealt with this. And, this is, what I learned. And, here's what I would do in your situation, but like, it's up to you. And that to me is like incredibly helpful. And I've also been fortunate to coach, a lot of productized founders, and return that favor as well. And so, yeah, that I would say, yeah, definitely like my one advice is like, if you're feeling like isolated and, especially as a solo founder, like get a great, coach that you can work with.
Totally agree. Yeah. I had some mentors in the beginning that definitely helped talk through these different scenarios and stuff in the early days. And it's incredibly helpful, incredibly valuable, especially, like you said, solo founder. I was a solo founder for the first year and a half and then brought in some partners and stuff afterwards, but it's definitely a lonely endeavor sometimes at times. So awesome, man. Well, this has been super insightful. Get a sense of how you run Testimonial Hero, kind of how you got there and how you're thinking about navigating some of these different times. And I hopefully the founders listening get a ton of value out of it. I definitely did as well, and appreciate you jumping on with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Pleasure to be on, and fairly active on Twitter. If anyone wants to reach out, that's probably the best way to get in touch. And of course, testimonialhero.com if you want to learn more about what we're doing there.
Cool, man. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Out of the Woods podcast. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. More episodes are on the way. If you want to keep the conversation going, suggest questions, or nominate guests for future episodes, you can reach me on Twitter at Michael Martocci. Good luck and see you next time.